What happens when the person the world has been guessing about finally decides to speak not as a character, not as a headline, but as a human being with a trembling voice and a heart that has held too much in silence? For a long time, Shen did not respond. Not when the rumors grew louder. Not when her name was dragged into whispers she never created. Not when strangers built stories about her heart, her thoughts, her private world. She stood still in the storm and said nothing, because sometimes silence is the only shield a gentle soul knows how to use. But now she has spoken, and the world is leaning in, not because of chaos, but because of the way her voice didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded raw, soft, almost fragile. And in that softness, there was strength. Right now, right before the next revelation, is your chance to stay connected. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another powerful story, another shocking twist, or another unforgettable journey. Her words were not screamed. They were barely above a breath. But they carried the emotional weight of years. She did not present a confession. She offered something far more rare in an industry that thrives on polished surfaces. She offered honesty. She spoke of Dylan not as a fantasy, not as a headline, but as a presence. A steady presence. A quiet understanding. A warmth that did not ask for attention. She described him not with drama, but with stillness. And sometimes, stillness says more than any dramatic declaration ever could. There are people who support you loudly, she said. And there are people who support you silently. Then she paused. And sometimes, the silent ones feel the most real. It wasn't a love confession. It wasn't the denial. It wasn't a confirmation. It was something far more human. She spoke about how it feels to exist under constant interpretation. How every smile becomes evidence. How every glance becomes theory. How it feels when your name becomes content instead of identity. Her voice cracked only once. And in that tiny crack, the world heard the truth. She talked about loneliness. Not romantic loneliness. Human loneliness. The loneliness of being surrounded by millions of eyes and still feeling unseen. The loneliness of being gentle in a loud world. The loneliness of carrying warmth quietly while chaos roars around you. And then she spoke his name. Not loudly. Gently. Not as a rumor. Not as a headline. But as a person. Dylan is very kind, she said. Kind. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Not passionate. Kind. And that word carried more weight than any fantasy ever could. She spoke about kindness as if it were rare. As if it were sacred. As if in a world addicted to conflict, kindness had become revolutionary. She talked about the way he treated people when cameras were off. The way he listened without interrupting. The way he noticed things that others ignored. The way he respected silences instead of trying to fill them. And in those descriptions, something became clear. This was not a speech designed to fuel rumors. This was a reflection designed to protect dignity. She did not build a fantasy. She dismantled one. She did not lean into the love story the world begged for. She built a quieter story instead. A story about humanity. A story about respect. A story about emotional safety. She said that in a world of fast judgments, Dylan felt slow, grounded, real, like a place you could stand without pretending. And for the first time, people realized, maybe what connected them was never romance. Maybe it was trust. The kind of trust that doesn't need to be photographed. The kind of trust that doesn't survive by headlines. The kind of trust that only exists in real life. She ended her words not with answers, but with boundaries. She said gently that some things are not meant for the world. That some connections are not meant to be explained. That some people deserve privacy not because they are hiding something, but because they are protecting something. And in that moment, the air changed. The story changed. The world didn't feel entertained. It felt quiet. It felt reflective. It felt human. So now the question is no longer about whether there is love or secrets or hidden chapters. The question is far more subtle. What do we lose when we turn quiet people into loud stories? And what do we gain when we finally let them be real? Shinyu did not confirm a rumor. She didn't deny it either. She did something braver.
She humanized it.
And in doing so, she quietly took back the story. Not with scandal. Not with drama. But with dignity. What happens after the truth touches the air is not chaos. It is silence. And in that silence, something far more powerful begins to take shape. Because when Shinyu finished speaking, there was no dramatic music, no explosive headline, no applause. There was simply a pause. A long, fragile pause that felt heavier than any rumor ever had. And within that pause lived everything she did not say. She did not claim love. She did not reject it. She did not feed the fantasy the world kept begging for. Instead, she gave something far more unsettling to those who live on spectacle. She gave restraint. In an industry where every emotion is expected to be performative, her quiet honesty felt almost rebellious. She chose tenderness over temptation. She chose respect over revelation. She chose peace over performance. And that choice changed something. People were no longer watching two celebrities trapped inside a fantasy. They were watching two human beings quietly protecting their own realities. They were watching maturity unfold where drama once lived. She spoke about weight. The invisible weight of expectations. The pressure of being turned into a story you never wrote. Of being placed inside triangles you never walked into. She admitted that there were days when she wanted to disappear. Not from fame. From noise. From being interpreted instead of understood. And then, almost like a whisper carried by courage, she revealed something that no rumor ever could. She said that Dylan never tried to become something for her. He never tried to impress. He never tried to mold himself into an image. He simply existed. And sometimes, she said, that kind of existence is the safest place in the world. In that statement lived something that no fantasy could compete with. Security. Not sparks. Not spectacle. Not chaos. Security. This wasn't the language of a love triangle. This was the language of emotional safety. And suddenly the world understood. This had never been about romance. It had been about refuge. About a calm place in a very loud world. About two people who could sit in silence without needing to explain it. She spoke about gratitude. Not romantic longing. Gratitude for someone who did not ask for more, who did not cross lines, who did not turn their connection into a performance. If someone respects your silence, she said, you remember them differently. The sentence wasn't loud, but it echoed. And the more it echoed, the more it changed the shape of the story. This was no longer a puzzle of who liked whom. This was a revelation of who protected whom. And those are very different stories. She didn't romanticize him. She honored him. She didn't portray herself as a victim of rumors. She portrayed herself as someone who chose calm anyway. She ended this continuation of her truth not with drama, but with something dangerously rare in entertainment.
Peace.
Not dramatic peace. Not staged peace. But real, uncomfortable, quiet peace. And that peace left people with less to argue about and more to think about. Because when the fantasy dies, something else is born. Perspective. Empathy. Restraint. The story no longer belonged to the world. It belonged to them. And in a world where privacy is treated as weakness, their silence now felt like strength. So now, the question is no longer who is in love. The question is, who has the right to know? And maybe for the first time, the answer feels clear. Not us. Not the headlines. Not the comment sections. Just them. Two people, standing quietly outside the storm, no longer explaining themselves to a world that never listened to silence anyway.